Yo, have you heard about Anchor? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome, everyone, to the L7C podcast, the NBA Conversation Part 2 with our basketball expert, Evan Debo. If you haven't listened to Part 1 yet, I suggest that you do. Part 1, we talked about the NBA draft and recapping that. And Part 2, we're going to talk about some NBA offseason moves that are going to have a huge impact on the league. So we're just going to throw it to the guy who knows basketball better than anyone, Evan Debo. Let's talk about the NBA offseason, man. Where do you want to start?
That's a good question. That's $1 million question. Now, there's so much movement. How do we cover everything?
Let's start with the champs. Let's start with the champs.
Okay. So the Lakers definitely made some upgrades.
Yes.
Definitely some surprising ones. So they pick up the NBA Sixth Man of the Year, Montrezl Harrell, steal him as a free agent from the Clippers, which says even more about the Clippers' turmoil and alleged bad locker room culture and everything else. He just walks across the hall in Staples Center and goes over to the Lakers. So you lose Dwight Howard if you're the Lakers. You pick up Montrezl Harrell. Mm-hmm. You get rid of you trade Danny Green and a pick to Oklahoma City for Dennis Schroeder, who was the runner-up for Sixth Man of the Year. So I mean that's a great upgrade as well. You re-signed Markieff Morris, you re-signed Jared Dudley, re-signed Kostas Antetokounmpo, which is obviously just like a hey, look how much we helped your brother. Remember this in 2 years, and please come sign with us for Giannis. Because they don't have no plans with Kostas. He's definitely not Giannis. And they re-signed Anthony Davis. They gave a 2-year extension to LeBron. And then they pick up Wes Matthews and Marc Gasol, two really, really great defenders. And Mark's going to be a huge upgrade over JaVale McGee, who they sent to Cleveland. And losing Dwight Howard, who tweeted that he was re-signing Love You Purple and Gold, Laker Nation, let's run it back. And then deleted the tweet, and 38 minutes later, signed with the Sixers. So that's the most Dwight Howard thing ever, but you're exactly right. Great place to start. Lakers have retooled, re-equipped. They have obviously the shortest turnaround, along with the Heat, in terms of offseason between seasons in NBA history. But they've got a lot more depth now where I feel you can rest LeBron, you can rest Anthony Davis with this shortened season and bring him back for when you need him most in the playoffs. Love it.
Yeah, I think my number 2 team who I think did really well in the offseason, but with the Lakers getting all those players, I think they definitely won the offseason, especially with the extensions of AD and LBJ. But the other team that I think did really well in the offseason draft included was Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia hit a lot of things that they needed. They were the ones who actually got, I think, Danny Green in that trade. I know it was traded to Oklahoma City, but I think he actually went to Philly. They got Seth Curry in the trade, who was a remarkable shooter. Obviously, in part 1 of the podcast, we talked about their draft pick, Tyrese Maxey. They got Dwight Howard for a year. They did lose Al Horford, a pro's pro, Josh Richardson, Smith, and Nato. But they did get Doc Rivers, too. So I really think Philadelphia made some pretty good moves with getting some shooting on that team to spread the floor for Simmons and Embiid. And with better coaching.
Yeah, I mean, Absolutely. And two, getting Daryl Morey from Houston. I mean,
Oh yeah, yep,
that's
yep.
that's how all this. None of this happens without getting Daryl Morey from Houston. So you get a backup. You essentially bring in Dwight Howard on a dirt cheap, probably slightly more than the vet min. I know Dwight's got a lot of kids to feed. Um, so I don't know if that was a difference in him resigning in LA versus coming to Philly or not. So I think that was the case. They were somehow gave him a little bit more money than the Lakers were willing to do. So, but I mean, Daryl comes in, gets rid of that albatross of an Al Horford contract,
Yeah,
ships him to Oklahoma City for Danny Green. You're right, who was traded from the Lakers to OKC, and the Schroeder deal lasted like a cup of coffee basically, and then was on to Philadelphia. I mean, I think Danny took a lot of hits for his performance in the finals, the Western Conference Finals. But I mean, Danny Green is still a really good defender in this league. Danny Green is still a spot up shooter. I mean, he's definitely on the second half and tier of his career, and one of those guys that's probably going to be done in like, I don't know if it's just another year or two or three, but when you talk about a team that needs shooting, is Philadelphia. And they got him. They got S. Curry on Twitter, and Seth, who's a really, really great bench scorer. So you've got those two guys. You draft Tyrese Maxey. It's you've really expanded how you attack and approach your offense. You can spread the floor out now for Embiid and Simmons. You don't have to post and beat up in the corner a billion miles from the basket when the dude's like 7'1", 7'2". Also pick up Terrence Ferguson in that deal for Oklahoma City, who's battled a lot of injuries, but really physical defender who can, take some of the other team's best in terms of defending on the wing. I really, really love it. And Tony Bradley's another surprising. I mean, I know he's a real young guy. Played some summer league time for the Jazz, I think 2-3 years ago, something like that. But I really like him. I mean, he could be a guy who could come in and if you get injuries or you need to rest Embiid tonight, and you got to start Dwight and have kind of Tony is in the mix with Biggs coming off the bench. I don't think that's bad at all. I think that could be a pleasant surprise for the Sixers. But again, it starts with Daryl Morey. It starts with Doc Rivers. Complete culture change here. Sixers are back.
yeah. I think it's a real prove it year for both the young stars, Embiid and Simmons. Now with Doc Rivers coaching, with that, they really have to show some things this year. And we talked about Daryl Morey and coming from Houston. Let's get it out the way right now. Probably the biggest trade that's happened, and probably the biggest, to me personally, the WTF trade. Russell Westbrook is going to Washington, and the Rockets are getting John Wall. We talked about this a couple pods ago. We gave our finals recap and things like that. That Russell Westbrook was talking about him wanting out, not wanting to play with James Harden anymore, which is kind of crazy because when he was coming in, oh yeah, I wanted to play with James Harden. He's my brother, blah, blah, blah. And then randomly John Wall was talking about he wanted out of Washington, even though the guy hasn't played in God knows how long from all his injuries and then getting injured dancing and in his own home and things like that. But they did a swap. Evan, I mean, I personally think it's a WTF trade, but what did you think of that trade?
I mean, when you look at the contracts themselves, I think there's a slight difference which way it is. I mean, both really bad contracts. You end up paying both guys like $46 million or $48 million, whatever we texted back and forth the other day, like in the 2022-23 season. So essentially it was like a wash money wise. You got to think that the Wizards really made out well here. And I know there really wasn't much of a market for Westbrook. So if you're Houston, you get a first round pick back. And if you're the Wizards, I mean, as much as I really like John Wall, I think he's a great locker room guy. Bradley Beal had obviously a really nice post about, show me the ropes and everything else. Thank you. But I mean, John can't stay healthy. Like, when's the last time he played a full season? It was like 3-4 years ago. Like, I can't remember the specifics off the top of my head, but they obviously needed the locker room change because imagine that James doesn't get along with Chris Paul. We got to trade, bring in Russell Westbrook again. James doesn't get along with Russell Westbrook, so now we got to try to figure out that. And we've already leveraged the farm and traded away a billion years of our future to Oklahoma City to make the first trade happen. I mean, Houston didn't have a lot of options here, so I think they probably sold high on Westbrook. Or sold for about what they could get for Westbrook, and I think the Wizards sold really high on John Wall. I mean, again, I really hope John Wall can have a full year. I'd be interested to see how he does off ball with James in his hand so much, or if James finally starts playing some off ball stuff. I mean, that's the only way Houston's going to progress. And then look out for the Wiz, man. I'm serious. We talked about last podcast with you got Denny Avdia now in Washington. You've got Bradley Beal still, who's not forcing his way out. A lot of people are interested in Bradley Beal, but he's not going to Wiz management like we've seen time and time again, saying, "I'm done, dog. I'm out." They drafted Cassius Winston too, who's by all means is a really really good value pick at 53. They brought in Robin Lopez for some front court depth. They finally got off the Jan Mahinmi contract. I think the Wiz men are going to be. I think they're a 6 to 8 seed candidate. Things. I'll be honest.
One question for you, and then a comment on what you just said. First question: who do you think won the trade, Wizards or the Rockets? Yeah, I agree.
Wizards.
Two, comment-wise, I don't think a lot of talking heads are talking about this as much, but now we have KD and Westbrook in the Eastern Conference together. That's some TV. When the Wizards played the Nets, I'm just saying that John Wall and Boogie
back together in Houston.
Played up a lot too from them Kentucky days back in the day, but obviously that was the biggest trade that happened in the off season. None of us expected.
Yeah, for the Rockets, I really like the Christian Wood signing. I mean, he arguably was a guy who, again, has a lot of upside, was stuck on a Pistons team. I mean, I really, really, really like that. I think I misspoke earlier. I think I said that. Did I say Washington acquired a first? Because it was that. Did I misspoke? Because it was definitely Houston who got John Wall and a future first from Washington. If I said that backwards, I just want to make sure I corrected that. Yeah. So I mean, Houston they got a really young coach. I don't know that James Harden's really excited about, and Steven Silas. They've handcuffed themselves in so many different ways with assets. John Wall's a huge question mark. But obviously an all-star, another guard all-star and threat out there. I think he's definitely, he's obviously more of a Chris Paul type than he is a Russell Westbrook type in terms of explosiveness, in terms of, you got to monitor health and he's got to put a lot of investment in his body. Just real quick, the protections on that pick going to Houston in the trade are 2023 lottery protected, 2024 it's top 12 protected, 2025 top 10 protected, 2026 top 8 protected, then just becomes 2 second rounders if it doesn't convey by then. So I honestly think the Wizards if the Wizards make the playoffs, if they don't make the playoffs this year, they'll make the playoffs next year. So I think that pick will definitely convey by 2024. So, if you're Houston with not a lot of wiggle room, I don't know how to keep pulling this off. Now, Daryl Morey is not there anymore, but they got out of a bad culture situation. They get a first round pick back for Westbrook. One of the jillion, it seems, they sent Oklahoma City. They traded Robert Covington to the Trailblazers, got 2 picks out of that. So now suddenly you've got 3 first round picks, and you can, maybe be a buyer at the trade deadline. And, you're a couple injuries away from, if you make the right move on expiring, that, you could you could maybe get back into the conversation just as everybody's writing you off in the Western Conference if somebody goes down. I mean, again, short turnaround. If COVID pops up and takes a player out, or for a while or something like that, then Houston could be back in it. But I don't think that. But real last quick note on Houston, we spent a lot of time talking about this trade already.
Yes.
Former Buckeye Jayshawn Tate. I don't know if it was the Wizards or the Knicks or somebody who had his draft rights originally, but he is now going to be one of the called upon young guys on a low deal who has the opportunity to prove himself and possibly get some playing time with Houston. So good. Jason, really undersized power forward for the Buckeyes, but I mean, physical, aggressive, really, really like Jay Sean as a Buckeye, and good to see him make his way back from overseas to the NBA.
Tate family again. I saw him at Ohio State, but definitely saw him at high school, Pick Central, obviously with the battle against Gahanna, and at the time when he was also there. My youngest brother was the starting point guard, with Nick Ward in them, so I've seen them firsthand. They can play, and he's high motor energy, so that's very good on the Buckeyes Central Ohio thing. Evan, a move that some people are calling Christmas for this individual, Gordon Hayward. He is not on Boston anymore. He signed a deal with Charlotte, and I think he got a ridiculous amount of money. I don't have it right in front of me, but just your quick take on it. Was that a good move for the Hornets?
So it's the same case, right? If you're the Hornets and you're a small market team, I mean, you're gonna have to pay like $1.25 on the dollar to get the guys to come play for you. When you're not in Miami, when you're not in LA or Chicago or a Boston, some of those groups, you've got to overpay sometimes to get some talent in there. I think Gordon really struggled fitting in that system, and things were kind of doomed from the start after that devastating opening night injury a few years back against the Cavs. In his very first game as a Celtic, and he battled some injury stuff last year in the bubble. Just didn't quite figure its way out. That ended up being a sign and trade. So I think Boston ended up basically sending doing a couple pick swaps or something. They were able to get something out of it. And that stupid, I think they gave them some picks basically to make it a sign and trade so they could get that really, really large traded player exemption. So it's already been blasted on Reddit and Twitter of, man, can't wait to see how big a biggest scoring night the traded player exception had for Boston tonight. Because I think statistically teams don't really use that. I mean, that can be used in trades to basically absorb up to a certain amount. I feel like it was like 26 million or something they got out of it. So if you're Danny Ainge on the inverse real quick on Boston, you pulled the trigger and brought in Kyrie Irving, lost him. You signed Gordon Hayward to a big deal, lost him. Celtics that pushed the Cavs to a Game 7, the Eastern Conference Finals with two upcoming superstars, really aren't able to make that ascension yet, and they've lost a lot of assets. Remember, it was always Danny Ainge's war chest was the conversation, and famously, they just had an embarrassment of riches where they at one point offered 4 first-round picks to Charlotte at one point, trying to move up to get who's the guy Miami just traded to Memphis?
No, not Hassan Whiteside. He went somewhere else.
Oh gosh, I gotta look it up. This is Justice Winslow. Yeah, he famously offered 4 first-round picks allegedly to Charlotte to try to move up to get Justice Winslow eventually before he fell. So I mean, you've kind of a way to get take another stab at if you're the Hornets back. So you've got Gordon Hayward, drafted LaMelo Ball and Vernon Carey. I really like the Nick Richards pick. Another nice young big there too. And then they signed Bismack Biyombo back as a center there. So you pair him, you've got Mr. Bridges. You've got a lot of young talent there, and it's almost like it's nowhere near as great a talent as the Pelicans have, but it's it's kind of one of those things of like, yeah, we got a lot of like moving parts here and don't really have a direction. Got a lot of talent in different areas, and now Charlotte's not going to make the playoffs, but I think they'll definitely be a gritty team that'll get 20 to 25 wins, somewhere in that range, even with the shortened season. Maybe that's a little high, but yeah, I mean, Lamelo definitely has some talent around him. Let's say that moving into his first NBA season.
So I want to stick with Boston just for a little bit because it involves the Cavs, because Tristan Thompson is no longer with Cleveland. And
yeah, I mean, bittersweet. I just gotta like really get mad at a second for. I was as somebody who loves listening to the NBA Ringer pods and everything else. I mean, they were all saying, okay, well, we're the Celtics. Like the last 2 years, like, oh, the Cavs will just buy out Tristan Thompson and we'll just magically sign him for nothing, and we don't need to send him any assets whatsoever. Like he was nothing, and then magically he's the like I don't know, the second coming of Bill Walton as a big or something like that. But no, I mean Tristan. I don't know if his name's gonna ever go down the Raptors kind of thing. I mean he ranks high on games played. He was an Iron Man at one point, had like started like every game in like 3 straight seasons, and I think that came to an end like 4 years ago, something like that. But I mean, he's a guy who takes care of himself well. He's a guy that, even as he's continues to get a little bit older and in his career, that can still step out. I mean, as we saw in the finals, I mean, we were not screwed in that 2016 championship year when they would seek out and pick and rolls and try to get Tristan on Steph Curry or Klay Thompson. I mean, his length, his footwork for a big out there. You want to talk about some of the guys we just talked about in the draft that we hope can work on the footwork from the big position to step out and at least be tolerable on switches if you have that defensive breakdown. Tristan's going to really bring that. He's going to be a really, really good asset to go against the Joel Embiids in the playoffs for the Celtics, to go against the DeAndre Jordans for the Nets, to go against the Nikola Vucevic's if Orlando makes it back there, and Miles Turner for the Pacers. I mean, that was a glaring hole for the Celtics they need to fix. I mean, obviously they've lost some great wing scoring. They'll have to figure out how to do that. They still need some shooting and some bench depth, in my opinion. But Tristan's great signing with him. Sucks to see him go. Cavs front court was already overloaded with Nance and bringing on Andre Drummond and Kevin Love there too. It probably needed to happen, but I'm glad at least he's going to contender and can back for trying to get another title.
Boston too. You talked about them losing people after they paid them, but they just gave Jason Tatum that 5-year, $163 million plus extension with a player option. Obviously, Tatum is the future, and Jaylen Brown and them. So let's
also some questions too with the Celtics about Kemba's health, and did they rush him back too early for the NBA bubble? That's been a huge just offseason topic. So they bring in Jeff Teague, who obviously very, very veteran point guard, was on that I think that 15-16 Hawks team that was kind of just really, really good. Any given night, 5 guys could go for 20 points, and they won 60 games. That'll be a good spot gap to fill, because I think Kemba's going to take some time now to try to get that injury right. But so they did pick up Jeff Teague too for some bench depth. So Martin, let's stay in the East and let's go to. We may have already talked about this trade, I think, the last time and how appalling it was. Let's go to arguably the second biggest trade, definitely top 3. Over in Milwaukee, and how we're supporting one Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's yet to sign his extension. Obviously, the Lakers and the Heat, and so they've got enough cap space to throw the max at him here in a couple of years. Bucks need to do something after not advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals. They traded away the family farm, grandma, and everything else for Drew Holiday. Sent out Eric Bledsoe. Martin, what do you think about the trade before I just absolutely rip Bucks?
Well, I'll be nice.
Go ahead.
quick so you can rip them on them. I mean, I was shocked because, like you said, they traded like the whole team, like basically almost for no. I mean, Drew's good, but it was like I don't think all the parts that were traded equal to some of Drew Holiday and some other things they got. And when you're trying to keep a superstar like Giannis, with us being in Ohio and watching all the basketball that we did, we kind of went through this thing with LeBron, the first stint in Cleveland, where we look at some trades and be like, "What are we doing?" Like he's gonna leave us because we're not doing enough to want to keep him around. And I think history is repeating itself potentially with Giannis. Obviously, we got to get on the court and see how they play. But that's just the feeling I have personally. So the floor is.
So the specifics on what ended up being a 4-team deal for Milwaukee ended up being that Milwaukee got Drew Holiday as kind of the main blue chip from that deal, which is obviously an improvement upon what Eric Bledsoe brings to the floor. Another great defensive player. They also acquire in that 14 deal Sam Merrill, what was the 60th overall pick in the draft. They sent George Hill to Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City acquired a future first-round pick that was originally from Denver. Zylan Cheatham, Josh Gray, Darius Miller, Kenrich Williams. Essentially, they were able to get off some money from Oklahoma City from Steven Adams' contract. And Steven Adams went to New Orleans along with Eric Bledsoe, 2 future first-round picks from the Bucks, and then a right to swap 2 additional first-round picks to Milwaukee. So I think as a part of that deal, technically, and then R.J. Hampton, the 24th overall pick from Milwaukee, went to Denver in the deal. I think as a part of that, Cavs got another second-round pick from Milwaukee so they could convey one of those first-round picks earlier to the Pelicans because they were owed one in the George Hill trade from Milwaukee. The Cavs were so. And with the steeping rule, you can't trade first-round picks in successive years. So basically, to kind of get around that and convey that first-round pick sooner to Milwaukee that we were owed, they gave us a second-round pick basically to move our first-round pick back and lessen the restrictions on it. So, yeah, 2 first-round picks, right to swap 2 first-round picks. I mean, this is, in my opinion, this is Bradley Beal stuff. This isn't Drew Holiday stuff. This isn't a Drew Holiday pull. I'd argue this could be, 3 years ago, this was definitely a Chris Paul acquisition. There's a lot of players I'd put basically 2 to 4 first round picks. And Drew Holiday, I don't think is one of them. The Bucks need to do something. You're right. Just like back to the Cavs years with LeBron. What are you doing? What are you doing to make him happy? What are you doing to keep trying to get better and reach a title and everything else to make sure they stay? They sign their extension. If Giannis between now and February signs his extension, it doesn't matter. It was worth it. Does not matter. The optics can look bad. It can look bad on paper. If you get him to re-up for a long period of time, that's all that matters. And it was worth the overpay and everything else. Again, but that said, hopefully this is what gets the Bucks moving forward. The East definitely got better. They benefited last year from not having to play the Nets and with Durant and Irving, and Toronto and Philly regressing a little bit. But I don't know if this gets them over the hump, but I definitely like the move. Also for the Bucks. So in free agency, they did sign DJ Augustine, which is another great. So they essentially traded out just about everybody and almost didn't have a bench whatsoever for Drew Holiday in that deal. But you bring in DJ Augustine, who's starting point guard for the 8th seed Magic in the first round last year. You bring back Nick Stauskas, who had a brief cup of coffee with the Cavs, good shooter, end of the bench guy, not a guy who's going to. He's a guy who can spell you if you got some injuries or some COVID things out and still be productive and could get you maybe 10 to 12, as an end of the bench rotation guy. They also bring in Bobby Portis, from New York, former Chicago Bull. Physical, kind of a tweener, 4'5", who can step out and hit threes. So I mean, I like some of that added depth there. And then again, they waived Ersan Ilyasova, who they originally had traded away, and what ended up being insult to injury, Martin, with what happened with the Bogdanovich deal, where it was reported originally that they were going to acquire Bogdanovich before the trade thing opened up, and I think the league got on it quick about, hey, this violates our anti-tampering stuff. And basically, I think the trade was announced like well before what was like the Friday of that week's opening of or Thursday of the trade deadline, and then and free agency and stuff. And then Bogdanovich ultimately signs with the Hawks. I mean, it was almost like the Paul George debacle, right? Where you had like an agreement for the Cavs to basically trade Kevin Love and the number 8 pick and get back Paul George, and then like one team like went back on it, or a player went back on it. I mean, that would have been huge to add to the Bucks. I mean, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this was a heck of an offseason, even with overpaying for Drew. But that falling through was devastating.
Yeah, I agree. It's bad. The honest watch is ticking, because a player can only take so much of this caliber where they're like, I want to be out and try and win elsewhere. But you brought up something also that you could see this a couple of years ago being a Chris Paul trade. Well, Chris Paul did get traded. He got traded to the Phoenix Suns. I know in part one of our NBA conversation that we talked about this a little bit with the pick the Phoenix took, but you got a leader like Chris Paul, who definitely showed the world last year. He still had it, taking that OKC team to the playoffs and going Game 7 with Houston. And now you put him with a young guy like Devin Booker, who is mega explosive scoring wise, and you got a young guy like DeAndre Ayton. You talked about Washington looking out 6, 7, 8 seed. I'm saying the same thing for Phoenix. Watch out for them. They could be a 6, 7, or 8 seed in the West potential.
Martin, I think if you got the Lakers, best case scenario for the Clippers here. If you got the Lakers, you got the Clippers. I don't think the Warriors are as dead in the water as everybody thinks, as long as Chef Curry's out there. I don't know if I'd put him as high as 3. You've got the Trailblazers, who had a really good offseason too. You've got the Pelicans, who are in the conversation. Martin, I think the Suns could be a 3 or 4 seed. Just going to go on record.
I mean, shoot. But if everything works out,
DeAndre Ayton, Jalen Smith, point book back to shooting book. Chris Paul, who willed that young Oklahoma City team by himself so far. They lose Kelly Oubre, which is tough to see, and he ends up on Golden State, which is, I mean, another reason why I don't think they're going to be as fighting for a 6 seed or something like that. Everybody says he is, but you bring in Etuan Moore for some bench depth, veteran and serviceable kind of combo guard out of Purdue a few years back by way of the Pelicans. You re-signed Dario Saric, and then you also snagged Jay Crowder from the Heat for some perimeter defending too. So, I mean, I really think that we could be looking anywhere from 3 to 6. I think you're going to see the Phoenix Suns. Worst case scenario, I mean, they're going to be a playoff team, I think, finally for them. And they were one of the most impressive teams in the bubble with how they ascended. Now, granted, you lose some of those pieces that helped get you there with Kelly Oubre's of the world, but that's that. Martin, let's jump to the Pacific Northwest, and let's talk about a little south of Pacific Northwest first. Let's talk about those Golden State Warriors. So they bring in Kelly Oubre. They draft James Wiseman. They bring in Nico Mannion, a good prospect for a guard later, and a good quality pick later in the draft at 48th overall. You picked up You got rid of D'Angelo Russell late last season and brought in Andrew Wiggins. Obviously, the devastating news with Klay Thompson. That's a story of the year for them. I mean, just my heart breaks for that guy trying to get back on the court. You bring in Brad Wanamaker too for some bench depth from the Celtics. And Kent Bazemore, who's really been bouncing around lately, but started his career, I think, with the Warriors, and one of the best towel wagging guys any bench has to offer. So I think they've retooled despite losing Clay. Really like their prospects, and they're also some potential there that they could package some players, and if that right thing popped up and Bradley Beal was available, as you said in the last pod, you could ship out maybe maybe a James Wiseman, a future first or two, maybe send Kelly Oubre back to Washington if Brad absolutely forces a way out. But all things considered, I think we were all waiting for Golden State to use that number 2 overall pick that they had and leverage it to get back yet another high performing guard, wing, or all-star caliber player. They didn't do that. They're going to run it with James and see how things goes. Martin, what do you think on the Warriors?
The first thing that you said, I would say don't sleep on the Warriors just yet. I do think, as you said, if Steph Curry is fully healthy, also if Draymond Green is fully healthy, and depending on what they do with Wiggins, things like that, and they already have great coaching, great GM, great owner. Don't sleep on this team just yet. I'm not saying they're going to win the title by any means, but I'm definitely saying that they will potentially be in the playoffs if they're all healthy, and they'll be fighting. I think a lot of people are already thinking that they're going to be a lottery pick going into the next draft, but I don't see that yet if everyone is healthy, because they obviously have a chip on their shoulder because they would have been right back in the championship hunt this past year if the injuries did not happen. So.
Martin, let's stay in the Pacific Northwest. We referenced them earlier as having a good offseason. Let's go to the Portland Trailblazers. So they re-signed, their gamble paid off. Out of basketball for, essentially a year. Carmelo Anthony comes in and is just what they needed. At times, obviously, he hurts you defensively. Still really good. Melo's still really good as a spot-up shooter. That was well worth it for them, and he returned the favor by re-upping and staying on there with them. Portland also, again, they shelled out the 2 first-round picks for Robert Covington, kind of maybe a little high of a price to pay, but I mean, Covington, again, great wing defender. I know they, in the draft last couple of years, they went with some young wings. The kid out of North Carolina last year, and they took a flyer on, what was his name? Somewhere. Can't remember, the former Cavs, not CJ Miles, but former Cavs, Rodney Hood. They were hoping Rodney Hood could fill that hole at the 3 thing, and they bring in Robert Covington, and you can stick him on your team's best 3 each night, and that gives you some flexibility where Melo's not as obvious to try and have to hide defensively for what Covington brings up, and he can knock down 3-pointers too. So like that, they picked Derrick Jones Jr., who's kind of buried down the Miami roster, who's incredibly athletic wing and dunker that we know of. I think he's going to bring some really good things to their second unit there. And then they bring back Enes Kanter, who was kind of out of the rotation sorts towards the end with how Daniel Tice was playing on the Celtics. I think he's got a lot left. In terms of like a quality big man, but I really like Portland's offseason.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, they made a lot of good moves to help Dame and CJ, and obviously we saw what Dame was doing in the bubble to get to that 8th seed. And I do think that injuries and just fatigue derailed their chances of competing with the Lakers because they lost in 5. But the moves that they've made, if they also, I know it's always the caveat, they were not a typical 8th seed. If they would have been healthy, they would have been close to a 5 or 4 seed in the West. as they've been before. Remember the year before this bubble, they went to the Western Conference Finals when they were fully healthy. So with the moves they made, and if everyone's healthy, I would look for Portland to definitely compete in the West semis and potentially get to the West Finals.
Martin, let's go to Steve Ballmer's Los Angeles Clippers.
Boy. Okay.
So if you're the Clippers, you draft Daniel Otero, 33rd overall pick. You acquire Luke Kennard, Ohio guy, who had spent some time with the Pistons. I think he came over in a quick flip around trade from the Raptors, I think. And then speaking from the Raptors, you replace the money you probably were going to spend on Harrell, save a little bit, and you bring in Serge Ibaka, who I absolutely love. I love Serge Ibaka. Huge part of the Raptors run. You probably saw the funny quote this week, basically, that they interviewed Ibaka about it, and he said, "Yeah, I just got a text from Kawhi. It's basically like, hey man, like, are you coming?" Like, that's all it said. And then so they got him. They re-signed Reggie Jackson, and then Nick Batum, who really was a guy with really high upside for the Portland Trailblazers a few years ago, and just got the big contract from Charlotte that never panned out, and Charlotte ended up just buying him out. So they brought in him to add to the team. They lost Landry Shamet in trade with the Brooklyn Nets. They lost Rodney Magruder to a trade to the Detroit Pistons, and then free agency lost Trez. JaMychal Green went to the Nuggets, and Jonathan Motley, who was towards the end of their bench. Martin, what do you think about them? And then I got a quick Paul George story I heard the other day.
I think when they lost Montrezl Harrell to literally their cohabitating neighbors, I think that was all that really needed to be said about them in free agency. They lost Green too, Laundry, Joakim Noah, he retired. Marcus Morris is sticking around, Reggie Jackson, Patrick Patterson. Obviously, new coach. Tyronn Lue is the new head coach since Doc is gone. And with the Clippers, I think after the first year and the way it just ended, there's no excitement about what they're going to do this year, because last year just the way it ended was just so terrible that it's like, oh, there's the Clippers. They might get to the West semis and then lose to the Nuggets again. It's not the same excitement we had a year ago going in saying, oh, it's the Clippers. This team is the title favorite. The Lakers and Clippers are going to go 7 games and things like that. I just think even with the moves now, I don't see how this puts them anywhere near the Lakers from what I'm seeing. And I just think they're a West semi team at best at the moment. Could be wrong. Paul George and Kawhi have shown major improvements, but right now, West semis is what I'm seeing their ceiling to be after these offseason moves.
I mean, I hope Ty Lue's the guy to right the ship and get things turned around. I mean, we all know he's a player's coach. We don't win the Cavs title without him. I mean, he was the right guy at the right time. I think you're going to see some accountability from him. I mean, there's been it's been widely reported, whether it's, I don't know how true or not, that Kawhi and Paul George basically would show up late to practices. Kawhi doesn't live in LA and he could just helicopter in whenever he wanted to. And there was zero accountability. They ran their own schedules, and all the dogs, all the vets, the Pat Bevs, the Harrells, everybody who'd been around there was what the heck? We put in our effort, everything else, and these guys are like prima donnas out here. But the real quick Paul George story, I don't know if you saw or not. So Paul was on the All the Smoke podcast with Matt Barnes and who's the other guy? Captain Jack, Steven Jackson. All the Smoke podcast, it's called. As a part of the SHO Sports Network. So Paul was quoted on there saying, trying to slander Doc Rivers. And said Doc was trying to play me as a Ray Allen or a JJ Redick. All pin downs, George said. I can do it, but that ain't my game. I need some flow. I need some mixes of some pick and roll and post ups. That last season was hard. And then shout out to the Ryan Russillo podcast earlier this week too, who or it was him or Kevin O'Connor who dug up actually factually inaccurate, as we're doing with all things politics of, hey, this tweet is disputed. Of any of Paul George's seasons, this past season, he had the most pick and roll percentage of his entire career. So a little bit trying to kick out the door. And of course, like once he said it, like Matt Barnes, Steven Jackson are like, yeah, man, yeah. Like doing some validation stuff. And I mean, as Ryan Russillo said on his podcast too, like, I don't expect those guys to know his pick and roll and pin down percentages and everything else. Like, and just in the moment, try to appease a guest or whatever. But yeah, that's not the case. I mean, and yeah, Paul George he's not that leader. We're going to continue to question him until he's got a ring on his finger. Whether it's now or 3-4 years from now, and he's like the third or fourth guy on like a super team. I mean, at a certain point, you're almost getting to a spot where that's really the pathway for some guys, But I just thought that just poor taste. Just another incident of Clippers players not named Pat Beverly who just are part of the culture problem.
I want to do another story on the Clippers because this is as of recording today with ESPN doing their interviews. They interviewed Kawhi Leonard and they were talking about the outlook for the Clippers this season. And he is saying that they're motivated because, the way the season ends, losing a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets. And he likes that challenge, which I mean, he is a two-time champion. He is a two-time finals MVP now, too. So technically, career-wise, I mean, he could retire now and he'll be in the Hall of Fame, no problem whatsoever. But I just don't have any excitement towards the Clippers because from the way I saw last year in their culture and Paul George, that I just have no excitement towards them, and I don't think they're gonna do anything I don't see them knocking off the Lakers or going to the finals. I just don't. Yeah. And I guess Evan, let's hit on some quick, just any other quick free agency moves that caught your eye. We're running again. This one is 50 minutes, and if they listen,
we've covered most of it. There's a few things in here though. So Denver, I like the flyer at the 24th overall pick. We didn't touch about it in the draft piece on the last time of RJ Hampton, who arguably was one of with Cole Anthony, with Anthony or Mr. Edwards and James Wiseman was, regarded as like one of the top 4 picks, basically, or top 4 recruits. And he also went the overseas route. So a lot of question marks there. Didn't really pan out for him. Also playing, I think, in the New Zealand League or something like that, or maybe Australian basketball. So, but I mean, that could be another Michael Porter Jr. high upside pick for Denver that, really took a big leap last year. So they lost Jeremy Grant. The one thing I do want to talk about is what the hell did the Pistons do? The clock struck midnight and they went like full sign Timothy Mozgov to like the max, basically. They signed Jeremy Grant away from Denver. Definitely overpaid for that a little bit. I mean, Denver was like, yeah, we like Jeremy Grant. We're not going to pay him that much. And then their first 3 moves technically, are to draft 2 bigs in Mason Plumlee and Jahlil Okafor. This is after they traded Andre Drummond for peanuts to Cleveland. Now, granted, there clearly wasn't that much of a market for Andre Drummond. I think I don't know what they traded him for, John Henson and like some scraps, basically. And then they take a flyer on Josh Jackson. Long been a character issue that never panned out. He was definitely a lottery pick for the Phoenix Suns a few years ago. Take a flyer on him. And then we've got our third ball brother in the league with a non-guaranteed, I think, exhibit contract technically with LiAngelo Ball. So I don't know what the Pistons are doing. I hope Killian Hayes is a good, bright spot for them. I think Sadiq Bey could also be a good draft pick as well. They brought on DeLon Wright and Rodney Magruder as a part of a couple different trades. But, I mean, paying out that much money to Mason Plumlee and Jahlil Okafor and Jeremy Grant, like, That's some like Nick and King's front office decision making. So that's my next big takeaway from all things free agents. That was what a horrendous Detroit everything. That
Yeah,
was bad.
Detroit. I mean, they don't know what they're doing. They don't. I just take it for what it's worth, and maybe next year. I mean, it's just those one of the. We'll see what we do in the lottery next year with them. And I guess also too, just side coaching hires. I mean, obviously with the Cavs, just so you just hit them. I mean, Tristan's gone. Delvadova's there 1 year, two months.
Delhi. Make sure Oso listens to this podcast because he loves him some Delhi. No, but they lost. Yeah, they lost him. I think Damian Dotson's a really good guy who filled was a serviceable scorer for the New York Knicks, and Damian and like training camp interview so far was like, we're really surprised they non-tendered me, and Cleveland was the first to call. So I mean, I think that's going to be a serviceable guy you might see come in and have a sporadic Damian Dotson night, and you see 18 points. You're like, who's this dude? And then you might not hear anything from him anymore. But I mean, that's it. Delly's not going to play much. He's basically on a minimum, and he's in that Udonis Haslem, who's also coming back for like a cajillionth year. Shout out class of what was it, 03 as well, I think, on a NBA draft terms. But just an end of the bench locker room guy, and that's valuable. That's worth a million plus or whatever they're paying Delly to be that end of the bench locker room culture guy. Losing Tristan, you're going to need a guy like that. So and then they get I think a second in the trade. So basically, the Cavs helped the Lakers get Marc Gasol by bringing up enough money to sign him outright by bringing on JaVale McGee essentially for a couple players the Cavs sent out that the Lakers would then waive that were on some partial or non-guaranteed money, and they got I think another second round pick back. So Kobe Altman, the GM, is acquiring second round picks like fiends. And as you saw, I mean, a couple years ago, we packaged some together and we got Kevin Porter Jr. as a steal towards the end of the draft last year. And I mean, he's had kind of a tumultuous offseason, was cited for improper carrying of a firearm, which misdemeanor in the state of Ohio. You and I talked to, I mean, it's one of those things where like, if you've got your concealed carry permit, it's nothing. You're allowed to do that. So it kind of speaks to some of the maturity stuff we heard about him from USC. Coach Biggerstaff's not really interested in, or doesn't really see a whole lot in that. Knows that like, hey, that guy's got to grow a little bit. Even I think Andre Drummond, some guys come out and said, yeah, we just need to show this, just continue to show this guy, look him up. The way to go about things in the NBA. And there was a rumor of him allegedly striking a lady in a hotel back in August. No charges were filed, or at an apartment complex, something like that. So I just bought a Kevin Porter Jr. jersey last year and was all in the bandwagon. I hope I can stay there. I mean, and I certainly wouldn't want to support somebody hitting women by any means, if that were true. So, but a lot of question marks there. And then finally, they brought in Thon Maker, has some playoff experience. I think he's on a non-guaranteed or something like that. Basically, almost a training camp invite. Started for the Bucks in the playoffs. I think the first year with Giannis at the center position. Stretch big. Not gonna wow you in a lot of different areas, but productive. Yeah. So that's the Cavs in a nutshell.
With that, Evan, anything else before we sign off on part 2 of this today?
Yeah, real quick as we go through. So the NBA season dropped up through I think March 3rd. Yeah, so it's a shorter year. On the Cavs perspective, we might win. Like, I really feel good. We're going to start out like 3-2 or 4-1, which is good based on who we're playing. And then quickly, like in February, we might win one game because we're playing like the Clippers and the Rockets and the Warriors. Like, and it's kind of you're seeing they're trying to do the schedule where you're playing like 2 games close together with the same opponent in some areas. So like if there's contact tracing or whatever, it's not going to affect the whole league. It's only going to affect a few teams if you've got some folks unable to play games. So. But no, the season's out. I was potentially devastated at the thought of not having NBA on Christmas, but we've got NBA on Christmas. So the noon game will be Pelicans Heat, 2:30. Just as you're prepping for the Christmas feast, will be Warriors Bucks. During your Christmas feast, you will have Kyrie Irving returning to play the Boston Celtics along with Kevin Durant as a member of the Brooklyn Nets. Hey, I took a nap after the big dinner and I've woken up suddenly at 8 o'clock game is going to be Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks taking on the Los Angeles Lakers. And then the nightcap at 10:30, Clippers Nuggets. So good to see that. As you mentioned earlier, or next Friday, Saturday, I think is when NBA preseason games start. So that'll be great to see, hopefully some televised basketball for teams that were in Bulls and Cavs and Kings haven't played since March.
Yeah.
Good to see those guys back on the court. And then finally, just breaking today, some really, really strict COVID things. I'm going to pull up a Woj article real quick here just to make sure I nail down the specifics on some strict protocol stuff for travel. Article is titled "NBA Warns of Sanctions for Protocol Violations." So Tim Bontemps, another ESPN reporter that works with Woj, had tweeted out 4 hours ago. The updated protocols say that once COVID vaccines have become FDA approved, a lot of good nuggets in here, and deemed safe and effective. I don't know how you quantify that, since a lot of times you don't see the effects of vaccines for a while. It just depends. 100% I'm for vaccines, so let me just put that out there. I'm not trying to go in a different direction. The NBA and NBPA will discuss whether there will be a requirement to receive the vaccine for Tier 1 and 2 individuals. So that would be players, coaches, and staff is what they're dubbing Tier 1. Protocol would say that if the vaccine winds up not being required, the two sides could then discuss, so the Players Association and the league, discuss additional health and safety restrictions for those who don't take it. So such different testing, mask wearing for those so basically you can opt out, but you still have to do all the mask use and everything else. So additionally, in the NBA's updated health and safety protocol, the league also says that violations that lead to COVID-19 spread that cause schedule adjustments or impact other teams could result in fines, suspensions, adjustments, loss of draft choices, and game forfeiture. We've seen some NFL coaches, Martin, and teams get fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oakland Raiders, I think, got hit with a $500,000 fine. I know there's a hefty fine to John Gruden, their head coach. I mean, it's good to see the leagues taking this seriously, but I mean, really strict health and safety guides come out today. Specifically, this one with some of the nuggets I'm talking about here was 158 pages that also address things such as allowing for team and player dining at quote unquote approved restaurants, on trips, outdoor dining, and indoor restaurants in fully privatized spaces, and air quotes. So I'm sure they define that somehow, somewhere. At home, players and staff are not allowed to enter bars, lounges, clubs, live entertainment, gaming venues, with limited exceptions, public gyms, spas, pool areas, or large indoor social gatherings of 15 or more people, the NBA said in that 150-some page guide. So, Martin, lots to digest there on some things that came out today. I mean, we're limited. Also, yeah, I mean, sounds like some pretty strict stuff on where you can go, where you can't go during the season, who you can socialize with, how many people you can socialize with. I mean, these are all things that the rest of society has been mindful of, I think, and trying to slow the spread and get the virus under control until a vaccine comes out. But today, essentially, the Players Association and the NBA put pen to paper on some serious stuff here. What are your first thoughts on some of those things?
Obviously, you got to put that stuff out there just from you're in PR, from the PR standpoint, because that's the first thing people are going to ask with, okay, they're not going to the bubble, they're going to be traveling, so what are the rules? And I think with these type of rules, you want to start, I think, overly strict so that as things go on over time, you just mentioned vaccines, things like that, then you can loosen some of the rules. I don't think you ever want to start loose, then go strict. You want to start strict and then potentially get looser over time. And the NBA knows what it's doing. I mean, they had the bubble, which was super successful in terms of all those players were able to play and made it out okay, no COVID complication, things like that. So they're ahead in this. And I think now with them seeing the NFL, how the NFL we're a month away from going into playoffs, and they've been able to be flexible with their rules and flexible with scheduling. So I think it's the right thing. I haven't looked at the full 100-something pages, but from your premise,
we'll get Cedric, our resident lawyer, on that right away. We'll have him go through and find where there's loopholes, where it's gray, and what can be mandated, and what violates certain statutes. So we'll get Cedric, when you listen to this, buddy. Yeah, we could use your help.
But I think with that being said, I think that is, well, nope, just to add a quick thing, maybe 30 seconds. They're suspending the random marijuana testing.
Yeah. So that beat by a couple days. That beat out the House, United States House of Representatives vote. I think it was either the day before, maybe it was a couple hours before. It was real close, but it definitely beat the formal legislative vote at the federal level to loosen restrictions, decriminalize, tax at a federal level, I think. But I mean, it's the same thing all the leagues been facing with marijuana use. NHL, the NFL, Major League Soccer, that you operate, you're a basically a federal operation trying to fit within the parameters of very different state things. Every time people go to Denver, it's a different experience than if you're in, I don't know, probably a very different experience than if you're in Wyoming or Ohio or, you name the state. I mean, it's good. It's a good measure, I think, to get out an antiquated thing that just is a part. It shows a part of the times and where we're at as a society, and it's time to focus on more serious things than the marijuana use with players.
Agreed. And with that being said, this is the end of the NBA conversation.
Thanks for listening, folks.
That is true too. Thank you for listening, everyone. You probably got 2+ hours of all the basketball info you can take in regards to the draft recap in part 1 and the offseason recap in part 2.
Martin, I want to throw a challenge out there for listeners. For listeners, get at us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Submit your NBA questions, or what are you looking forward to most coming up with this season? Whose off season do you like the best? Anything, everything NBA. Shoot us some questions for our next pod. We'll call it like a mailbag of sorts, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. We got all the answers, right, Martin?
That is true, and I guess we're shooting questions and things. I just want to shoot one to you too. Definitely, we do take a little break between the NBA ones, but let's get back next week. Because we're trying to plan the end of year where we have everyone, and that's right before the season starts. So we actually need to get back on and let's do a preview of the season. Let's go through over/under wins, who we think is going to make the playoffs, and who we think is going to be champ on our next pod. How's that sound?
I like it. Let's go with it. Looking forward to you sent the email out to the to the group. I think yesterday, the day before, just trying to get everybody on, and it'll be somewhat of a mega podcast of personalities, perspectives, and anything and everything. Looking forward to maybe crossing lines and talking some roles in leadership in sports and women leadership in sports with Chelsea Police, and talking some Buckeye football with Mr. Byron, and I don't know, maybe I'll dust off some of my OG upbringing with some Dragon Ball Z stuff too. We'll see.
We'll see. But with that, everyone, thank you for listening to the L7C pod. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.